In this video, we're going to take a look at the revolution in Saint-Domingue. It all starts with the French Revolution, July 14th, 1789. They decide to overthrow the king and start a new republic in France, which starts a debate in this new government. What about the colonies? Do we give them independence? Do they get the same rights as French people? And what about slavery? Where's slavery going to go? Is that going to continue? So it leads to a lot of open-ended questions. We're not so sure with a completely new government. And in the end, this is going to spark the Haitian Revolution in 2 years. In the meantime, there's already some fight against slavery in France with the Society of the Friends of the Black, Société des Amis des Noirs, which is a small group of abolitionists who are writing books and pamphlets and are pushing the government to get rid of slavery. And this has its roots in the French Enlightenment and the philosophies of freedom. And they saw slavery as a shameful thing, a shame and a stain on the national character. And so here's we've seen this version in English in America and in England. Am I not a man and brother? While many were against slavery, they also knew how important it was to the economy. So people might have said that, yes, slavery was bad, but it's making us a lot of money, so let's keep it for a while. Saint-Domingue supplied the goods for 40% of all French foreign trade, so they were making a lot of money, and they were very much reliant on slavery. So the French Constitution gives rights to citizens in France, but the French colonies, they do not get the same rights as citizens. And so they talk about liberty, but it's only for people living in France. They write up their Declaration of the Rights of Man with the help of Jefferson, and bring out a lot of good ideas such as men are born free and remain free and equal in rights. But this only applies to people living in France, not the colonies. And so this fuels a lot of unrest back in Haiti, because each group reads those words a little bit differently. So the planters, the rich whites, the Grand Blanc, they see the Declaration as only applying to the rich whites. And so all the rich white guys say, yeah, we're born free and equal, that's great. And then the poor whites are also reading this, the Petit Blanc. And they believe that they have equal rights, that all white people, so all white men, are equal. And this also starts to resonate with some of the slaves. The slaves start to hear this and say, no, all men are created equal. And so all these different groups, the rich whites think they're equal, all whites think they're equal, and then the slaves as well say, well, maybe we should be equal too. So each group is reading this a little bit differently. But in the view of France, they are not. So this fuels a lot of division, even in the white population, in that these changes back in France are seen as a new opportunity. Their chance for more autonomy, to get a little bit more independence, so they don't have to listen as much, they don't have to pay their taxes as much, because they're tired of the king telling them what to do. Maybe the Grand Blanc, the planters in Haiti, can kind of rule their own thing. So some were still loyal to the king, but others were saying this might be our chance to write our own rules and stop listening to the king. All whites agreed they needed to keep slavery and limit the rising power of the affranchi class. So they wanted white domination, but they were okay with getting rid of the king in a lot of cases. The affranchi, they were hoping for equality. They were hoping, and so the affranchi, these are the ex-slaves, they were hoping for equality from the French government, because the French government keeps talking about equality. However, they didn't want to get rid of slavery because many of the affranchi owned slaves. And so they were working with groups in France to push the government and to have a little part of their government saying, hey, as long as you're not a slave, you're equal with everybody else. Despite opposition from the Grand Blancs, despite opposition from whites back in Saint-Domingue, they were pushing for this. And so this little painting of that group, this mixed race group that wanted to push for equality regardless of race, but not ending slavery because they owned slaves. So the planters were too concerned with political fights, and all these slave owners are fighting each other to realize the slaves are starting to listen and rise up. So how did events in Europe shift the balance of power in Saint-Domingue? Well, we start to get this rebellion. And so Vincent Oge, here he is. And so, despite him being very, very pale right here, he is affranchi, he's mixed race. and he fights a little rebellion for equal rights for those that are mixed. He is a member of the society, the Abolition Society, the member of the Society of the Friends of the Blacks, and he tries to get Parisian planters to change the racial laws. He goes to Paris, says, hey, can we get these laws changed so that regardless of race, everyone's equal? And he's ignored. Britain at this point is already starting to push to end slavery, so British abolitionists gave him money to purchase weapons for an army of 300 infantry men. So England provides him guns. And because France is not listening, and he just got a whole bunch of guns, he decides to start his own rebellion to push for equality. It doesn't work. He is captured and executed in 1791 before the big slave revolt begins. And it's a big, nasty execution to kind of show off to everybody else. And he's publicly executed in Le Cap on the breaking wheel, which is worse than it even sounds. Here's a lovely picture. It's where you're tied to a wheel and each of your bones are broken and wrapped around the wheel. And so this is done publicly, and then he's put on public display with all of his bones broken as he just bleeds to death. So they're sending a clear message, don't rebel. And then they rebel. August 1791, revolution starts in the north and sweeps south across the colony. The revolt required months of planning, so they were thinking about this for a couple of years until finally it happens. So this is requiring coordination between slaves, these runaway maroon colonies, and some free the affranchi community. And so networks of communication were already set up, and they were already talking between plantations. It all starts with a voodoo ceremony, headed up by Boukman Dadi, and the plantations are set on fire and the revolt begins, all unified together in a voodoo ritual. And here's kind of a painting. We don't know exactly what happened in that voodoo ritual. A pig is sacrificed and they begin their fight that night. This is and will be the largest slave revolt in the Americas ever. They burned fields, sugar mills, and homes. They wanted to destroy anything that was connected to slavery. By September, 1,000 plantations were burnt, 100 whites have been killed, and the entire city of Calfronce, which was a very wealthy city, is entirely destroyed. Whites across the island are scared, as they should be, and so they call for help from whoever they can get. They call for help from the neighboring Spanish part of Santo Domingo, from Spanish Cuba, from English Jamaica, even from the Americans. They're asking for help from anybody that can provide it. France is kind of busy with their revolution, so France can't really help, as whites are being killed across the island. So they're nervous. In some cases in the south, it hadn't quite reached down south yet. It's only in the north. So in the south, a lot of the whites are increasing punishment on their slaves to prevent further revolt. And rebel leaders start to focus on strategy and political alliances. They're looking at the big picture and possibly winning this thing. So they start to trade across the border with the Spanish for weapons. With the Spanish are happy to see the French get weaker, and so they trade, and some people just want to make money. The slaves offer money from whatever money they stole from their masters to get more weapons to free more slaves. And we start to see guerrilla warfare, where they're hiding in the jungles and attacking, not in a regular, they're not marching in lines, anything like that. These are sneak attacks against French forces. And throughout the summer, by November, half of all slaves in the north join the rebels, so it's sweeping across the island. What do they want? They don't necessarily want freedom. They didn't think that would even be possible, so they're just looking for reforms. They want little changes. Better working conditions. So they want things like more days of rest. They want weekends off. And they also want to abolish the whip. No more whipping. Some believe that the king had already abolished slavery, but these planters, these colonial leaders, are holding back. So they're not looking to end slavery, but they start to lean in that direction. They just want reform. They want better working conditions. But over time, as they start to win, and they don't get those reforms that they asked for, they get more radical and they start to think, well, maybe we should go for slavery and actually go for complete emancipation, getting rid of slavery. And why don't we even take it a step further? Let's get rid of slavery and kick out all white people in the island. Let's take over the entire island. So they're going more and more extreme. As they don't get what they want, they go for something bigger. By November, the rebel leaders are trying to negotiate for better work conditions, but the troops are saying, no, we want more. Getting rid of the whip is not enough. We want freedom. So how did the Affranchi and the whites use slaves in their power struggles? Because slaves were fighting on both sides. May of 1791, the French government declares all free blacks born to free parents are equal in rights to whites. And so Affranchi, first generation Affranchi, are now free according to the French government. But all the white people on the island freak out. The rich whites, the Grand Blanc and the Petit Blancs, they refuse to allow it, so France backs off and says, okay, never mind. And people, Affranchi are not free. And so, what happens? The Affranchi are pretty angry about this, so they decide to join the rebels. And so the slaves and the Affranchi join together to fight the whites. And so in some cases, Affranchi masters give guns to their slaves and just say, hey, let's fight together to push for equality for everyone. Let's get rid of racial discrimination. They're hoping that somehow they were hoping that they could convince their slaves to come back and work for them afterwards. I really don't know what they were thinking there. August 1792, France decides, okay, we're going to give in on this, all free blacks citizenship. So the Affranchi are now equal under the law. The colonial government and the Affranchi armies will now work together to overpower white planters and stop the slave revolt. So things have shifted now a little bit. And so the Affranchi are now turning against the slaves, and the colonial government is working with everybody to stop the slave revolt. The French government at this point sends 3 commissioners to take control and make sure that equality is enforced. And so Léger Félicité Sonthonax becomes the new ruler of French Saint-Domingue. So this guy shows up and says, okay, everybody, hey, those that are free will now get equality. And he will go in, he moves in, and he imprisons any rebel whites that refuse to allow equality. And he starts to put some of the black people in power. Some of the Affranchi are put in power. But he's still trying to end the slave rebellion. He's still trying to keep slavery. He's just trying to basically enforce equality for black people that have freedom. European monarchs are worried, and they're worried that this is going to spread, that more and more kings are going to be killed across Europe. Plus, they see this nice chance to attack France and take this territory. Haiti is worth a lot of money. They're making a lot of money off of sugar. And so Saint-Domingue is a big target because this little chunk of the island is producing more exports than all of Britain's and Spain's Caribbean colonies combined. This is big money, so it's a huge target. Taking Saint-Domingue could end the French economy and really help the Spanish and the English economy. So it's a good island to attack. Early on, Spain and the UK were neutral because they didn't want to fight France. But both feared that if this slave revolt didn't stop, this might spread to their colonies. This might spread to the Spanish colonies over here and the English colonies surrounding it as well. And so they got to stop the slave rebellion. Plus, if they can take it, they might make some money too. So Cuba and Jamaica might be next. So they're worried. Saint-Domingue slaves and free blacks were sympathetic to the rebel cause, so they're worried about the spread of slave rebellion. So white colonists and rebels were often crossing the border for supplies and safety, so Saint-Domingue leaders are kind of worried that everyone's crossing the border back and forth, and they're worried that both sides is possibly invading. And European neutrality is over. King Louis's head was just chopped off, and they're worried that more kings are going to be attacked, so England and Spain decide to declare war on France and invade the island to stop the slave rebellion, to stop the spread of democracy, and to possibly take Haiti to make some big money. We'll take a little break there.